everybody, this is Felisa, and I just figured that I would do this continuation of story time since I mentioned it on my last vlog, and maybe this will continue to give some of y'all some encouragement, particularly during this time of the year if you're missing loved ones that have passed on. So here we go. I think I mentioned in one story time that I discovered that my grandmother was not biologically related to me because there was someone at church that just desperately needed for me to have that information. I was probably about 8 or 9 at that time. And I was devastated to find this information out. And really, the background on that, in case you're interested, is that my grandfather and my biological grandmother um, were married for a short while before she became ill. She'd had my mother, and then she became ill and subsequently passed away and left my grandfather with a 6-year-old. And so my grandfather, of course, in that time, this was like the early 50s. So, this was not the time for single dads to be in it, but that just did not happen until he was able to find out, like, he didn't know what to do with this little girl. So my mother talks about, she went to Catholic school. And so my grandfather would drop her off at the convent early in the morning, and the nuns would attempt to do her hair. And then, they kind of helped him with all of the girl things that, my mother was experiencing because, again, he didn't know, and he didn't even have sisters. He had like 8 siblings, and there were 9 boys. 9 boys. God bless my great grandmother. But anyway, I digress. He finally did meet the woman that I consider my grandmother, married her, and remained married to her until his death in 1986. Well, they had been together for all these years, and they both were in their 70s when I was born. And my grandfather was a late in life father, so he was like in his 40s when my mother was born. So they were really quite settled in this marital thing by the time I came along. And, I just recall that their marriage was truly a partnership. It wasn't, this romanticized sense of engagement or interaction, although, I want that too, child. But they just had a respect for each other that was profound, that was deep, and it was real. And just the way that they would interact and the way that they would care for each other and show concern. I can't recall any PDA in front of us because that wasn't the norm. You just didn't do that in those days. But the love was palatable, and you knew when you walked in that house that there was love there. So I always felt that, and I always keep that in the back of my mind because that's what I would like to have someday. Anyway, when my grandfather passed away, my grandmother was completely lost. I mean, she just roamed around that big house by herself. And, even though we lived across the street from her at that time, I would go over as often as possible. The reality was that she really she missed my grandfather, and she just missed him, and it was really sad to watch. It really was. Well, when I had my first child, she quickly perked up, and he became like the center of her entire world. And I found out much later, much later, that even when she was sick, we had nurses at the house that would care for her during the day, and assist her for particularly for days when my mother would, she had to work, or I was, caring for my son and I couldn't come over there, just to make sure that she was never alone. And I would hear from her caretakers that, she would ask if my son was outside playing, and if they said yes, she would ask them to help her go sit in the window. And she would sit she had a huge picture window. She would sit in that window as long as he was outside and playing. And if I called him in for lunch or called him in because it was time for a nap, she would say, "Okay, I'm ready to go back to bed now." And she that was like her whole entertainment. So she just like that gave her a complete thrill, and she was very excited about becoming a great grandmother. As a matter of fact, she said she never thought in her life that she would ever live to see a great grand. So he was very important to her. But there did come a time when her health started to decline, and she'd had these dizzy spells for a long, long time, and so she was nervous to drive. So I was driving her back and forth to the store, wherever she needed to go, which wasn't too often. She really, at that point, wasn't really going out of the house, didn't care to. And she stopped going to church, which really should have been a warning sign for us. But she just decided that she wanted to stay in the house, and we just accepted that. Looking back on it, she probably was profoundly and deeply depressed, but we didn't understand those symptoms and those signs back in that time. Anyway, so her church started to send her like care packages, and people would rally around what is called the sick and shut in. For those of you all who don't come from, a traditional Christian background, Baptist. Anyway, so they have a whole shut-in list, and what they do is that they'll send people from the church to go and check on the members and take them care packages and things like that. So this particular day, one of the members was coming to the house. My grandmother knew this because she called ahead, and was bringing her some food. And so my grandmother's house was a 2-story colonial, and so she could see her bedroom window was actually looked out in the front yard, and you could see the driveway. And so she was getting dressed, we believe. We never did, figure out what she was doing, but she was in her room. We think that she was getting dressed. She looks outside and she sees, her name was Maureen. Maureen pull up and get out the car. And so she, for some reason, didn't want Maureen to have to wait, or maybe she thought if she didn't get downstairs fast enough, Maureen would think that she wasn't home. Either way, whatever happened, she started to go down the stairs. She got dizzy, missed a step, and fell down like 2 flights of stairs. And so after that episode, she was hospitalized. Well, while she was hospitalized, she, of course, had broken her wrist and, was really frail. And they had done like a complete workup of her and discovered that, number one, the reason for the dizziness was because she'd been having many strokes, but she also had a suspicious lesion on her colon. Well, true to grandmother form, she told the doctors, "It's not bothering me, don't bother it," verbatim. We could not convince her to do a biopsy. She absolutely refused, and so we just, we kind of roll with it because you can't force. She was lucid, so you can't really force her to do anything. And eventually, that lesion did become problematic because it developed into colon cancer, which it probably already was colon cancer by that time. But they needed the biopsy to be able to tell for sure, and to see how far it had spread and all that kind of stuff. But she refused to allow them to do that. Anyway, she eventually was hospitalized. She was very sick. And we knew that it probably would only be a matter of time. And my mother had been going back and forth to the hospital daily. And I remember that I was pregnant with my second son by this time. And she, I was going to the hospital, excuse me, but it was just so difficult for me to navigate being pregnant, and my mother would go the lion's share of the time, and I would go, as my body would permit me, but I definitely tried to make sure that I was there. Plus, I was working in that hospital at that particular time, so, I could go down and see her during the days that I did work. It was just like the weekends that I wasn't able to really get to her. Anyway, so one particular day, my mother called and she said, I just can't go to the hospital today. I'm going to take my grandson to the circus. So if they call you, you need to make sure that you go to the hospital. Absolutely, Mom, no problem. You need the psychological break, woo. So my mother takes my son to the circus. Sure enough, we get a phone call from the hospital telling us that, somebody needs to come down and sit with her because it's not looking good. So I get up and get my little pregnant self together and go down to the hospital and sit with her. Now, when I walk in the room, she is, I wasn't prepared. She was just writhing from side to side and back to back and just in so much pain, so much pain. And it really just, it broke my heart. And I remember asking if I could speak to the doctor, and the doctor finally came. And I said, hey, I'm such and such granddaughter. She seems to be in a tremendous amount of pain. This fool looks at me and was like, yeah, she's dying. Yeah, some people should not go into medicine. But anyway, so I was just taken aback by that response. I think, of course, I intuitively knew that she was not going to be with us long, but I wasn't expecting that answer. Anyway, I said, well, she's in a lot of pain. Can you give her more pain medicine? So again, he looks at me. He's like, we're giving her the maximum that we can give to her. If we give her any more, it'll kill her. So you just told. Anyway, so I left that alone. Because, as I said, that was also my workplace and I needed my job, and the words that were getting ready to come out of my mouth were not going to be poetic nor elegant. So I go back in the room, and I will say that one of the things that I'm so grateful for is that I had the ability to sit with her and to tell her thank you. Why can't I do these videos? Gosh, to tell her thank you. And tell her how amazing I thought that she was, and how much I loved her, and how much she meant to me. And I like to believe that she heard me. There were a couple of times that I asked her, I was like, Grandma, you know how much I love you, and she would nod, but she was just in so much pain. Anyway, so I wound up leaving the hospital. It was very late. I called my ex-husband. I told him to come get me. I was tired and I needed to go home. And I remember just getting home and just standing on the back porch and begging God, like, please don't let her keep suffering. Please take her. She's been so wonderful and so faithful. Please just take her. Please don't let her keep suffering. And that was just my honest prayer for her. She would just transition quickly and with no more pain. That was a Saturday. The next day, the next morning, as a matter of fact, my mother called and said she's gone home. And I remember thinking, just being at peace with that, which was a complete difference from my grandfather, of course, but just the idea that she was released from this body of pain. Anyway, so we, I didn't necessarily have the grief that I had for my grandmother, but oh man, I missed her. And I would talk to her and I would, ask her, just, how is she? I miss you. I hope I make you proud, things like that. And I, one night, had a dream. And in this dream, I was standing in my grandmother's kitchen, and my mother was with me. And y'all know old school houses that, in the day, they had like a phone on the wall in the kitchen. And with the cord that, literally you could take it out to the front porch if you needed to. But, people didn't have a whole bunch of phones. You had like one phone downstairs and one phone upstairs. You ain't got that much talking to do. Anyway, so the phone rang. My mother, picked up the phone. She was in the kitchen. She walked over to the sink and she's kind of leaning over the sink and she's talking. Well, I couldn't hear, obviously, who the person was on the phone or, what they were saying. But I just kept hearing my mother say, she said, hello. Hey. Oh, really? Thank you. Thank you so much. Just like that. So she hangs up the phone and she looks at me and she said, that was Cora. She said, your grandmother is fine. don't worry, it's well. And when I tell you that, like, I woke up like, thank you. Because, first of all, Cora was my grandmother's very best friend in life, just like Mr. Fowler, my other dream. Cora, it wouldn't have been, like, it wasn't weird that Cora was calling. And I forgot to say in that last video, and I'll say it in this video, both Cora and Mr. Fowler died before my grandparents. So they were already gone by the time my grandparents passed away. So the idea that she was hanging out with Cora again, and, you know, the idea that she was fine, and, you know, that she was like, listen, I'm too busy to call these kids and tell them that I'm good and stop tripping. Like, I will forever be grateful for that. And, you know, because my grief was, I won't say that it was any less, but, you know, in that moment, I understood, you know, my grandmother was in a tremendous amount of pain, and I didn't want her to live like that, and I didn't want her to suffer and hang around because she felt some obligation to be here, because I really do think that she was fighting to hang on for us. And I'm like, no, just, it's done. Like, it's you like, your body, and it's okay for your soul to rest. It's okay. And I just think that, you know, the stark differences between my grandfather and my grandmother are so apparent to me, and how I dealt with that. And again, you know, like I said previously, it doesn't mean that the grief is any less. Like, I cried for her and mourned, and just like, but again, for me, like, I miss her. I miss her and I miss him, but I believe that messages are around us all the time, and I believe they communicate with us, but we just don't listen. And, you know, we allow religiosity and, you know, weirdness and fear to prevent us from actually hearing the messages of our loved one. It doesn't mean that you're entertaining, you know, spirits or whatever, but I do think that there's a message to be had, and I think that those messages bring us peace and they bring us comfort, just even in signs and symbols that you ordinarily wouldn't have. Like, don't be so quick to blow them off as coincidence or your mind playing tricks on you. I think that you have to start to be open to the idea that the spirit is energy, and energy never dies. It never dies. So if you know that, then you know that they are capable of sending us messages. I just believe that. Anyway, I'm Felisa. Again, leave your feedback and your thoughts below. I would love to hear from y'all, and I'll talk to y'all later on. Bye.